He left her sick and pregnant without a second thought, but 4 years later she was dying, and their daughter was all she had left. Claire Hudson once believed that love could fix anything, even the impossible. When she fell in love with Jacob Sloan, she truly thought her life was settling into something beautiful and rare. He wasn't just a man, he was a world, a billionaire CEO with a reputation for being sharp, disciplined, untouchable. But with her, he had let his guard down. He laughed more, talked about childhood memories, about fears he never voiced in boardrooms. She had seen the softness in him that no one else knew existed. That's why when she discovered she was pregnant, Claire didn't panic. She thought if anyone could handle unexpected news, it would be Jacob. She thought he would hold her, tell her they'd figure it out, promise her that the life growing inside her would be loved. Claire's world changed completely in the weeks that followed. Gone were the elegant brunches, the well-tailored dresses, the late-night dinners in Jacob's penthouse overlooking the skyline. Her days were now filled with hospital visits, long nights battling nausea, and endless calculations about money she didn't have. The treatments were harsh. She opted to delay the most aggressive chemotherapy until after the baby was born, fearing it would harm her unborn child, and doctors supported her carefully balanced plan. Even then, the milder doses weakened her, made her dizzy, stripped her of energy and appetite. Her long brown hair, once a soft wave down her back, began to fall out in clumps by the second month. She shaved it all off before it could finish abandoning her and started wearing a white cotton headscarf every day, not out of shame, but out of a quiet sense of control over something that was taking everything else. She sold almost everything: her car, jewelry Jacob once gave her, even the piano her grandmother left her. It hurt, each sale, like erasing pieces of her identity, but survival demanded it. There were nights she cried into her pillow, so weak she could barely lift her arms, wondering how she would carry this pregnancy to term. But even in her worst moments, she never once considered giving up. There was something about the baby growing inside her that made her feel brave, something sacred and anchoring that made every moment of pain bearable. She would talk to her bump, whispering little updates, promises, dreams. "I'm going to protect you," she'd murmur at night, even when she couldn't sleep from the chemo-induced aches. "I don't know how yet, but I will." In the 7th month, Claire was hospitalized after a dizzy spell caused her to faint on the stairs of her tiny apartment. The fall wasn't serious, but her immune system was too fragile to take chances. The doctors recommended that she stay in the hospital for monitoring until the delivery. She had no family to call, her parents had passed years ago. Most of her friends had drifted away when her world stopped revolving around normal conversations and started revolving around illness and survival. Alone in that room, hooked to IV fluids, Claire thought about Jacob for the first time in weeks, not with longing but with quiet disbelief. How could someone who once kissed her like she was the most important thing in the world vanish so completely the moment life got hard? When the time finally came, Claire gave birth to a baby girl with pale skin, soft blonde fuzz, and deep brown eyes that held more depth than any newborn should have. She named her Lily. Holding her for the first time, Claire felt a fierce, overwhelming love that broke through all the months of fear and grief. She cried freely this time, not because she was scared or in pain, but because she had done it. She had created something beautiful out of everything broken. Lily was small but strong. Nurses called her a fighter, and Claire smiled every time they did. Her body was far from healed. There would be months of treatment ahead, and no guarantees. But in that moment, watching Lily sleep with her tiny hand wrapped around her finger, Claire believed again for the first time in a long time that maybe, just maybe, love could still save something. Maybe it already had. The first year with Lily passed in a blur of exhaustion, quiet moments of happiness, and the constant rhythm of adapting to a new life. Claire's days were split between caring for her daughter and undergoing treatment, testing her limits in ways she never anticipated. Some mornings it was hard to get out of bed due to fatigue and side effects, but the sight of Lily stretching and looking up at her with those wide brown eyes gave her the strength to carry on. Their tiny apartment above a laundromat wasn't ideal, but it was warm, safe, and filled with love. Claire worked part-time from home, doing administrative tasks for the neighborhood clinic that had become her second home. The staff there supported her however they could. They provided help with childcare during appointments, food vouchers when things were tight, and even let her rest in the break room when she was too dizzy to walk home. Despite the uncertainty of her health and financial pressure, Claire made sure Lily's world felt safe and joyful. On better days, they went to the park, read bedtime stories and danced slowly to soft music, with Lily's laughter filling the room. As Lily became a curious and talkative toddler, her questions began, about families, about dads. Claire had imagined these moments many times, but found that Lily was content knowing that her mommy loved her more than anything. Their little life, built with care and strength, was enough for now. Claire never spoke about Jacob, not from bitterness, but because she had chosen to let go of the past. He had walked away during a time of great need, and chasing old memories no longer served her. What mattered was Lily's smile, her safety, and the rare days when Claire felt well. But then, when Lily was 4, Claire's energy began to fade again. The signs were familiar: a persistent cough, deep fatigue, and difficulty staying alert through the day. Though she tried not to jump to conclusions, a visit to her doctor confirmed that her condition had returned and was developing faster than before. The treatment options were limited now. The medical team focused on comfort and stability rather than recovery. Claire listened calmly, though the words landed like distant thunder. She asked the hard question, how much time might she have, and received an uncertain answer. Not long, though no one could say for sure. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep in her blanket fort with a flashlight and books, Claire stepped into the bathroom and let her emotions surface in quiet solitude. It wasn't fear for herself that overwhelmed her, it was the thought of leaving Lily without someone to love and protect her in the same way. The following morning, Claire took the first step toward planning for Lily's future. She met with a social worker at the hospital and explained her situation in full. The woman was understanding, but direct. We need to think about long-term guardianship. Do you have any family? Claire hesitated for the first time in years. Then, quietly, she replied, Lily's father. Jacob Sloan. Saying his name felt strange, like reopening a closed book. She didn't know if he still lived nearby. He hadn't reached out, not once. But even so, the idea of Lily being placed with strangers while her father was out there somewhere filled Claire with uncertainty. She gave the hospital permission to reach out to him. That evening, as she watched Lily sleep, one arm around her favorite stuffed bear and the other gently resting on Claire's own, she whispered a quiet wish into the silence. Please let him be someone I can trust now. She deserves that much. For the first time in years, Claire let herself believe that something good, even something uncertain, might still be possible. Jacob Sloan hadn't thought about Claire Hudson in years, not intentionally at least. Her name had surfaced occasionally in his mind like an echo. He tried to silence with work, travel, and a rotating circle of meaningless relationships. He had thrown himself into expansion deals, tech mergers, and personal rebranding, turning himself into a man the media adored and rivals feared. But even with all his success, there was a gnawing emptiness that no amount of accolades or headlines could fill. He had told himself that what happened with Claire was simply life. It had been too complicated, too overwhelming. He wasn't ready, and he had walked away. End of story. Or so he believed. On an overcast Tuesday morning, as he scanned through his assistant's briefings, Jacob noticed an envelope on his desk that wasn't part of the scheduled reports. It was from a hospital, handwritten, not businesslike at all. Curiosity piqued, he opened it expecting some charity pitch. Instead, he read a note that knocked the breath from his lungs. Claire Hudson, terminal cancer, a daughter. His daughter. The letter was short, polite, and unsigned. But its words left no room for doubt. The child existed. Claire was dying, and they were asking if he would come. For the first time in years, Jacob didn't go to his meetings. He sat in that office chair for hours, staring at the letter, remembering the exact moment he chose to leave Claire, to shut the door not only on her, but on the possibility of becoming a father. At the time, he thought he was saving himself. Now, it felt like he had amputated a part of his soul. He didn't speak to anyone. That night he drove to the hospital without a call or an appointment. He didn't want anyone to prepare for him. He wanted to see the truth unfiltered. The pediatric wing was painted with soft colors and lined with drawings. As he passed through, he caught sight of a little girl sitting cross-legged in a playroom. She was building a tower of blocks, her brow furrowed in concentration, her hair was soft and fair, but her eyes, those were unmistakable. Deep, serious, rich brown. Claire's eyes, the same expression, the same quiet fire. He stood frozen, unable to breathe, until the girl looked up and saw him. She didn't smile, didn't run. She tilted her head slightly, then said in a voice so calm it shook him, "Are you Jacob Sloan?" He knelt slowly, unable to find words. She continued, "Mommy said if you ever came I'd know you by the sad look in your eyes." That broke something in him. He lowered his gaze and whispered, "Yes. I'm your dad." She studied him for another moment, then stood up and took his hand, small fingers curling around his. "Come see Mommy, she's been waiting." He followed her through the corridor, the weight of regret making his steps heavy. When he entered Claire's room he barely recognized her. Pale, fragile, wrapped in thin blankets, but still her, still fierce, still beautiful. Her head was wrapped in a soft scarf, and her features were worn, but her eyes lit up when she saw Lily and then landed on him. She didn't say his name, she didn't curse him, she simply said, "You're late." He let out a breath that had been trapped in his chest for years. "I know," he whispered, tears already forming, "but I'm here now." The silence that followed said everything words couldn't. There was no need for explanations or excuses, only time. And there wasn't much of that left. The next few days moved like slow waves, quiet but heavy with meaning. Jacob found himself visiting the hospital every morning without being asked. He would bring coffee. Claire no longer had the strength to drink, and little treats for Lily, who met him now with a cautious smile instead of guarded silence. Jacob didn't try to fix anything with grand gestures or rehearsed apologies. He simply stayed. He listened. He sat beside Claire in the dull, sterile room filled with beeping machines and shifting light. The rhythm of their old life had disappeared, but a new, fragile cadence began to form, one of presence and responsibility, two things he had once abandoned. Claire didn't interrogate him. She didn't demand to know where he had been or why it had taken so long. Instead, she watched how he looked at Lily, how he tucked the blanket around her legs when she got sleepy in the corner chair, how he knelt down to help her pick up the crayons she dropped. Claire noticed how Lily's laugh had a different pitch when Jacob was around, a new sense of playfulness, and it both warmed her and broke her heart. Every interaction between father and daughter reminded her of what Lily had almost lost, and what she herself might not get to witness for much longer. Claire didn't look away. Her voice was barely audible when she asked, "And now, are you strong enough now?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead he stood up, walked over to her bedside, and took her thin hand in his. "I don't know if I'm strong enough, but I'll stay. Even if I have to learn everything from the beginning, I'll stay for you, and I'll stay for her." Jacob stayed until visiting hours ended. When he left the room that night, he paused at the doorway and looked back. Claire had already closed her eyes, her face peaceful. It occurred to him that this might be the beginning of a redemption he never believed he deserved, but now, desperately hoped he could earn. Jacob began to understand how much of Claire's world he had missed as he spent more time within it. He started arriving at the hospital earlier, often bringing coloring books or puzzles for Lily, but more than anything, he brought himself. Not the polished executive with a custom-tailored suit and million-dollar smile, but the man who had once loved Claire and was now trying to show up when it mattered most. He no longer answered work calls while in her room. He set his phone aside, listened when Claire spoke softly about her fears, her pain, and, sometimes, her memories of the girl she used to be before sickness took over. He stayed when the nurses came to change her IVs, when her breathing grew heavy in the late afternoons, when Lily would nap curled up in the armchair with her teddy bear resting on her chest. For Lily, Jacob became a quiet anchor. He didn't push himself into the role of father, but he began to show her that he could be a safe place to land. He read bedtime stories to her at the hospital, carefully brushing her hair and learning how she liked her sandwiches cut. One morning, as he carried her on his shoulders down the hallway, a nurse passed by and said, "You two have the same eyes." Jacob had paused, startled, until Lily smiled and whispered, "Mommy always said that." That small moment clung to him for the rest of the day. He had spent so many years pretending he wasn't a father, and yet here this little girl was so clearly a reflection of him that it hurt. One evening Claire asked him to help her shower. The request was both intimate and devastating. She had always been proud, fiercely independent, and now she couldn't lift her arms long enough to wash her own hair. Jacob said yes without hesitation, and in the quiet warmth of the hospital's assisted care bathroom, he helped her. Gently, carefully. His hands were clumsy, unsure, but his tenderness was unmistakable. Claire didn't cry, not then. But when he wrapped a towel around her shoulders and said, "You're still the strongest person I know," her lips trembled. Later that night, when the room was dark and Lily was asleep in the corner, Claire turned to Jacob and whispered, "You know, I never thought I'd see you again." He didn't respond at first. Then, quietly, he said, "I didn't think I deserved to." She reached for his hand, her fingers cold but steady. "Maybe none of us deserve anything, but Lily deserves everything, and now you see her. That's what matters." Jacob stayed long after the nurses asked visitors to leave. He curled up on the narrow couch, watching Claire and Lily breathe in sync, listening to the humming machines and the ticking clock that felt louder at night. He didn't know what the future held, he didn't know how much time they had left, but he knew he would not run again. And somehow that decision, finally made and lived, gave him more peace than he'd felt in years. Claire's condition began to decline more quickly than anyone had prepared for. The doctors adjusted her medication, trying to keep her comfortable, but even their tones had softened into something that sounded more like farewell than treatment. Her appetite vanished entirely. Some days she barely woke at all, her voice reduced to a whisper, her hands colder, her skin thinner. But Jacob was there for all of it. He took turns with the night nurse, often sleeping beside her bed in the uncomfortable hospital recliner, holding her hand through the long hours when silence stretched heavy and thick. He didn't know how to prepare Lily. No one truly did. She was too young to understand the intricacies of illness, but not too young to sense the heaviness hanging in the air. Claire, in a rare moment of strength, sat Lily on her lap and gently told her, "Mommy is very tired. One day soon, I'll have to rest for a long time." Lily didn't cry right away. She simply nodded, looking down at her hands, absorbing the words like puzzle pieces she couldn't quite fit together. Later that night, she curled up in Jacob's arms, asking if he'd still be there when Mommy couldn't be. He held her tighter than he thought his arms could and whispered, "Always." As the days passed, Jacob began handling legal arrangements at Claire's request. She had already signed the paperwork giving him full guardianship of Lily. Her lawyer, a kind woman named Elaine, confirmed everything had been done properly. Claire's voice trembled when she told Jacob, "I never wanted you to feel forced into fatherhood. But I trust you now. You've proven more in these weeks than I thought possible in years." Jacob swallowed his guilt and kissed her forehead, replying, "I'm not doing this because I have to. I'm doing this because I want to, because she's mine, because I still love you." In a rare moment when Claire was lucid and alert, she asked Jacob to take Lily outside the hospital. "Just for the afternoon," she said. "Show her something beautiful before everything becomes heavy." So Jacob took her to the botanical garden near the city's edge. He carried her on his shoulders, pointed out butterflies, let her run through hedged paths and touch flowers with names she couldn't pronounce. They sat on a bench eating popsicles. Lily's mouth stained red while Jacob smiled, watching her like she was the most fragile miracle he'd ever seen. That day became a perfect memory, sealed away in both their hearts, untouched by grief. When they returned, Claire was weaker, her breathing was slower, her eyes unfocused. Jacob sat beside her, whispering everything Lily had seen, every word she had said, how she laughed when the butterflies landed on his head. Claire listened, her lips curving faintly into a smile. Then, with all the strength she had left, she whispered, "Thank you, for giving her a day like that. For being the father she'll need." Jacob tried to say more, but the words wouldn't come. He simply held her hand through the night, not knowing if it would be the last. Claire passed away 2 mornings later. The sun had just risen, casting warm light through the window. Lily was asleep in the next room, and Jacob was there, holding Claire's hand. She didn't cry, she didn't gasp, she just closed her eyes, her face peaceful, as though slipping into sleep. A nurse quietly came in, checked her vitals, and nodded. There was no panic, only stillness. Jacob kissed her knuckles one last time and sat in silence. Later that day, when Lily asked, "Is Mommy gone?" Jacob answered honestly, kneeling in front of her, "Yes, baby. She had to go rest. But I'm here. I'm always here." And Lily, so small and brave, simply nodded and wrapped her arms around him. That night, Jacob and Lily lit a single candle beside a picture of Claire. They sat together on the floor, the flame flickering between them, and Jacob told Lily stories not just about her mother's final days, but about her life, her laughter, her strength, her fire. He promised that they would keep telling those stories, that her mother's love would never vanish, and in that small room filled with grief and memory and hope, something healing began to bloom. The weeks that followed Claire's passing were a blur of paperwork, quiet mourning, and the slow, deliberate steps of adjusting to life without her. Jacob had never known grief this intimately. It wasn't loud or dramatic, it was quiet, dull, like a weight he carried inside his chest that made every breath feel a little too heavy. He kept going because he had to, because Lily still needed her bedtime stories, her cereal in the morning, her hair brushed just the way Claire used to do it. At first, she asked about her mother constantly. Was she watching them? Could she hear Lily sing? Would she come back? Jacob answered every question with as much honesty and comfort as he could manage, never once shying away from her pain. He told her that Claire's love was in everything, in the sun that warmed her face, in the psalms they sang together, in every story they read at night. Slowly, the questions faded into quiet acceptance, and Lily began to smile again, not often, but when she did, it reached her eyes. Jacob poured himself into becoming the father he had never imagined he could be. He moved out of his glass high-rise apartment and into a smaller, cozy house near a park where Lily could play. He learned how to braid hair, how to soothe nightmares, how to make pancakes shaped like stars, because Claire used to say, "Every child deserves magic in the morning." He found a photo of Claire holding newborn Lily in the hospital and framed it, placing it by the window where the light would always touch it. Every night before bed, he and Lily would say goodnight to the picture. It became their ritual, a thread that tied past to present. Lily started preschool in the fall. Jacob walked her to class every day, holding her hand tightly until she let go. On the first day, she turned to him and said, "Mommy would be proud of you." He couldn't speak, only nodded, blinking back tears as she ran inside. He realized then that he wasn't just raising Claire's daughter. He was raising his own, shaping a future out of what had once been broken. And in doing so, he was healing himself. The guilt didn't vanish, but it softened, transformed into a kind of gratitude that he had been given a second chance, even when he didn't deserve one. Jacob started a foundation in Claire's name, focused on supporting single mothers battling illness. He funded hospital rooms that felt more like home, created programs that offered childcare during chemotherapy, and worked with women who had no one else. Every time he visited the hospital where Claire had spent her last months, he felt her presence not as a ghost, but as a quiet force guiding everything he did. The staff there welcomed him like family. Lily sometimes visited too, bringing drawings to hang in the pediatric ward. She would hold his hand as they walked the halls, and people would say, "You two look just like each other." And this time, Jacob would smile. Years passed, and Lily grew taller, stronger, her eyes still deep brown, her voice always curious. She kept asking questions and Jacob kept answering. They visited Claire's favorite places on her birthday, made her recipes on holidays, and always kept her memory alive without drowning in sadness. One spring morning, Lily, now 8, sat on Jacob's lap with a book in her hand and asked, "Do you think Mommy can still see us?" Jacob looked out the window where the sunlight spilled across the floor and said, "I do. And I think she's proud of the girl you're becoming. And I think she might even be proud of me too." That night, as he tucked Lily into bed and turned off the light, she whispered, "We're okay, Daddy." And Jacob knew it was true. They were okay, not perfect, not untouched by grief, but okay. Because love, even when it ends in loss, leaves something behind, something strong, something sacred, something that lets you begin again. This story deserved an ending as powerful as its journey through heartbreak, guilt, love, and redemption. Years passed since Claire's death, but her presence never faded. Jacob, once a man who fled from responsibility, had transformed into the father Claire had always hoped he would become. He didn't just raise Lily, he honored Claire with every small decision he made. The man who once turned his back on a pregnant, sick woman was now helping other women like her through the foundation he built in her name. Hospitals had rooms named after Claire. Families had hope because of her story. Lily grew into a thoughtful, kind, and determined young girl. She asked questions, challenged the world, and held on to her memories of her mother tightly but without bitterness. Jacob made sure those memories were rooted in love, not sorrow. They celebrated Claire's birthday each year by visiting her favorite places or baking her favorite cake. There was grief, of course, but there was more joy because her life had left something beautiful behind. One afternoon, years later, they returned to the same botanical garden where Jacob had once taken Lily during Claire's final days. Lily, now older, walked ahead, then paused at the same bench they had shared. She looked back at Jacob and said, "You didn't become my dad when I was born. You became my dad the day you chose to stay." Jacob felt the weight of every mistake and every moment of redemption settle in his chest. It was no longer a burden, it was purpose. What this story proves is that love doesn't always start at the beginning. Sometimes it begins with a second chance. Sometimes it begins in a hospital room, holding a hand you once let go. But no matter how broken the past is, there is always room for healing. Because when you finally choose to love, fully and fearlessly, you can build something even more beautiful than what was lost.